The Powerhouse Roundtable is brought to you by VoteForEnergy.org, a program of the American Petroleum Institute.
Time now for the Roundtable. I'm joined by our chief White House correspondent, John Karl, Republican strategist Sarah Fagan, who worked for President George W. Bush, now supporting his brother Jeb, E.J. Dionne from the Washington Post, out with a brand new book, Why the Right Went Wrong, and Republican strategist Kevin Madden, and Congressman Keith Ellison, who's endorsed Bernie Sanders. Welcome to you. With the Republicans, John Karl, ask you what I asked Donald Trump. Is it now a two-person race between Trump and Cruz?
Well, it sure looks like that way, absolutely, in Iowa. But, George, I have to say, when Ted Cruz came out with this New York values attack, it looked like it was a gaffe. Trump had a great moment in the debate. But what's it done since? It has driven everybody back to that interview 20 years ago with Tim Russert, where Donald Trump says he is pro-choice, pro-gays in the military, and does it citing the fact that he is from New York, not from Iowa. It may have been a masterstroke by Ted Cruz.
Do you think, I mean, because it's clear now that these guys are going to go at it for the next 2 weeks in Iowa. Who's going to get the better of this exchange?
Well, I think the person who may get the better of this exchange is the person who finishes third in New Hampshire. You have to think about these establishment candidates. There are 5 points that separate Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, and 3 in between, 3 candidates in between, Christie, Kasich, and Cruz. This is so early right now. It feels late, and yes, there was a massive fight going on between Cruz and Trump, but this thing is far from over.
It's definitely far from over. And Kevin Madden, you look at Iowa right now. Marco Rubio in 3rd or 4th place, depending on the polls, but has very high favorables. If these two go at it, Trump and Cruz, is it possible he could rocket up at the end?
I still think that Iowa is probably a race right now between Cruz and Trump. And I think one of the really interesting things, to John's point, is, you know, I expected that they would drop the New York values attack. But the biggest risk for Trump right now is, so far in this race, nobody's been on the attack, and none of the information about him has felt like it's been new. This feels like it's new at a time for a lot of voters that are making up their mind in these last 14 days before the caucuses that the idea of a New York liberal could be their nominee. This would start to work.
That may be true, Keith Ellison, but so far everyone who's tangled with Trump has gone down.
You know, New York liberal, Trump, news to me. Well, let me tell you, I think I have to stand back and say they all have tried to divide us based on religion, and I think it bodes well for the Democratic candidate. I support Bernie, but any Democratic candidate who can compare him or herself with these guys, as ugly as their behavior's been, it's a good thing.
Let me bring that over to EJ, because the Republican establishment appears, and you talk to them a lot, you do your reporting, appears to be coming around to the idea that one of these two could really be the nominee and not their first choice.
It's amazing, and I think what it speaks to is the transformation of the Republican Party that I talk about in the book. I think, you know, the party's made promises to conservatives they couldn't keep about shrinking government, rolling back cultural change. A lot of working class Republicans are mad because they voted for the party, haven't gotten much out of it. Trump is the revenge of those voters. And the party, if you look at the primary electorate, liberals have all left the Republican Party and moderates are gone. That's why we're talking about Cruz and Trump, and that's why the establishment is so worried.
It's hard to know exactly what the establishment is, Sarah.
Exactly. And a lot of them have gone over to the Tea Party. One thing about New Hampshire, though, that we're not talking about, independents. Independents can pick up a Republican ballot. That's where Kasich has a shot, or Christie, or Bush.
But it's also why New Hampshire may be tailor-made for Trump as well. But certainly put that question to you. As I said, you did work for President George W. Bush. As you talk to your colleagues, your former colleagues, people at the top of the Republican Party, if they're forced to choose between Trump and Cruz, who do they choose?
They would, I think, support Ted. You know, I say to my former...
I think it's a tough call, by the way. I think they would rather see Donald Trump.
Ted is a brilliant... he's a brilliant man. He can be very abrasive. People who work with him all will tell you that. But we also forget that, you know, outside the Beltway, people don't know any of this. What they see is a young, rock-ribbed conservative who's very articulate on issues that they care about. And people inside the Beltway get caught up in the personalities and the cocktail parties. And I don't think to the average primary voter.
But you did see that, Kevin, this week, Speaker Ryan choose Nikki Haley to give the response for the Republican Party governor of South Carolina, and she did have that very direct shot at Donald Trump.
Right, and many, there was also a backlash. So many voters out there felt like they were being scolded by this establishment that they feel that there's a canyon between them and the Republicans in Washington. They feel like that their anger is legitimate and that their voice is not being heard, and that the last thing they want from is another establishment, leader in Washington or being chosen by leaders in Washington to tell them that their anger is not legitimate. And I think that's why you saw so much in the talk radio world, and also so many among the grassroots conservatives start to actually push back on Nikki Haley. So it's going to be interesting.
Trump showed amazing restraint in the debate when he did not go after Nikki Haley, actually praised her and said,
"Oh, it wasn't South Carolina."
But that was discipline and restraint. He looked like a
He's more and more polished as a result.
But I think Kevin made a really excellent point earlier when he talked about Ted Cruz introducing this New York values argument. I think this was very smart by Ted. It was strategic, and it allows an avenue in which to put forth new information about Donald Trump, of which there is much, of which his record is quite liberal.
I want to remind us how southernized the Republican Party is, both in its membership and in its general spirit. New York used to have a lot of Republicans.
Democrats in South Carolina tonight, Keith Ellison, we saw from the interviews with Secretary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, they're going to go at it on a lot of different issues tonight. Which is the exchange as a Bernie Sanders supporter you're most concerned about?
Well, I think Bernie can hold up under any of these questions. I mean, he does have a D- rating for the NRA. I mean, he has been very clear that he recognizes the problem with guns, that he supports President Obama's position, and I think he'll be fine. But I think the bigger worry is how do we really address the real problems of the American people, which is stagnating pay, which is feeling that the whole system is rigged against them. I mean, anyone associated with that they got the main problem, and Bernie Sanders is picking up on this anger you mentioned, and I think that some of these conservatives ought to look at Bernie because they know he's straight up, he's honest, he tells it like it is, and he's going to.
The other thing he has going for him, E.J. Dionne, and this was just startling to me, this Des Moines Register poll this week showing that 43% of Democratic caucus goers right now in Iowa identify themselves as socialist.
Right, and and I don't think that's shocking. After the Wall Street crash, they've all gone out to see The Big Short, and they feel a certain way about capitalism. But I think right from the beginning, I think it was a mistake to think that Bernie couldn't win Iowa, because as you know, those are very progressive Democrats who show up at the caucuses. And then New Hampshire, he's right next door. And I think Clinton's got to pivot to an argument that says, look, a lot of you Bernie Sanders voters are perfectly willing to vote for me. She can't say it that way, but a lot of them expect to vote for her. I need you now. Don't just send a message, send a president. And that's a tricky message to send, because it kind of assumes that Bernie Sanders is not going to win the nomination, which sounds arrogant.
But
those are the voters she's got to win.
The numbers.
Right, exactly.
The numbers are, look, Bernie Sanders is in this. He is legit, and the numbers are showing it. I think that this argument that there's some inevitability to the outcome is now got to be wiped away.
No, she can't do inevitability, but she's got to say, and I thought her best answer to you was, if Karl Rove's going after me, they must be worried about me. And I bet you're going to hear that tonight, even though the Democrats have been crazy to stash these debates away, so you probably could have to find them on a milk carton.
At 9 o'clock on a weekend.
Right.
I mean, Hillary Clinton has been at her worst when she was playing prevent defense, when she was looking like she was inevitable. I mean, this limiting the debates, aging. Now she's realizing that, look, Bernie Sanders could win in Iowa. He could win in New Hampshire. She would still be the front runner for the rest of the way.
Assuming she holds on in South Carolina.
Yeah, but all bets are off if that happens.
What's really interesting about the Democratic race is, let's not forget, Nevada comes before South Carolina. So you could have a scenario where Bernie Sanders wins 3 contests, and for a month she has not won a contest. This is a game about momentum, and if she loses 3 contests, it's going to be hard for her to recover.
I will tell you, I like the fact that the Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are competing on the things that Americans care about the most, though. I mean, we cannot lose here, because we got 2 candidates who are banging on income inequality and opportunity in this country. So I feel good about where we're at.
And you're one of 2 in Congress that have supported him?
2 strong ones, though.
And one who's calling for massive tax increases, which the country can't afford to pay for any of this.
Oh, we can't afford.
I want to bring to you, Kevin Madden. We only have a little bit of time left, though. That question question I also brought to Donald Trump. A lot of people are going to look at this, see Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz on the Republican side. Mike Bloomberg's going to take a look at this. We see Jim Webb taking a look at this. Does this make a third-party run inevitable?
Well, I think if Trump is the nominee, you will see an incredible amount of pressure from the establishment Republicans in trying to get somebody who is seen as a more electable Republican, somebody who is actually can govern. I think many of those establishment Republicans, particularly
that would be before the convention.
Particularly the donors, I think they believe